People love to say betrayal always comes from strangers. They're wrong. Sometimes it's the people who share your last name. My name is Jessica Reynolds. I'm 29 years old. I'm a U.S. Army sergeant. And the day I received my Purple Heart was the same day I learned my own family helped put a price on my life. Before I tell you how that truth came out, let me ask you something. Have you ever given everything to people who never believed in you? And when your biggest moment finally arrived, they treated it like nothing. If that sounds familiar, stay with me. Because what happened next still doesn't feel real, even years later. I stood at attention in my dress uniform, the fabric pressed sharp against my skin, medals aligned perfectly over my heart. The ceremony hall was quiet in that respectful, almost sacred way, the low hum of whispered conversations and the soft rustle of programs echoing off polished walls. This was supposed to be one of the proudest moments of my life. A Purple Heart ceremony. Recognition for surviving an ambush in Kandahar that killed 3 soldiers I loved like family and left me with shrapnel scars I still feel when the weather changes. But my eyes kept drifting toward the 3rd row. That's where my family sat. My father, Robert Reynolds, leaned back with his arms crossed, jaw tight, eyes narrowed like he was waiting for something to disappoint him. He'd worn that expression my entire life. When I made honor roll. When I finished boot camp. When I earned my first commendation. Nothing was ever enough. Next to him, my younger brother Kyle leaned over and whispered something, his mouth curling into that smug half-smile he'd mastered in high school, the one that said he knew more than you and enjoyed it. My sister Hannah scrolled on her phone, glancing up only long enough to make sure the ceremony hadn't ended yet. My mother sat stiff and silent, clutching her purse like a shield, eyes forward, face carefully neutral. Around me, uniformed officers stood with quiet pride. These were my people. The ones who understood what this medal meant. What it cost. 8 years of service. One deployment after another. Missed holidays. Missed funerals. Missed versions of myself I'd never get back. They knew the difference between luck and survival. My family never had. When I told them I'd be receiving the Purple Heart, the reactions were exactly what you'd expect if you knew them. My father said, "Well, I guess that's something," like I'd mentioned a decent parking spot. Kyle laughed. "A Purple Heart? That's for getting hurt. They hand those out like candy now." Hannah sighed and asked if they really had to attend because she had plans that weekend. Only my mom tried to sound proud, but even then, her voice felt rehearsed. And when she thought she'd hung up, I heard her say, "She chose that life." What did she expect? That sentence stayed with me. I chose that life. I chose the army because I needed structure, purpose, and a way out of a home that felt like it was always one crisis away from collapse. Growing up, I was the responsible one. While my siblings drifted, I worked. While excuses flew, I showed up. When money got tight, which was always, I found ways to help. Even after I enlisted, even after deployment paychecks started coming in, I sent money home. Rent. Car payments. Emergency bills. Mistakes I didn't make but somehow had to fix. They criticized my service, mocked my choices, but never hesitated to cash the checks. Family is family, I told myself. Loyalty matters. Even when it hurts. The general stepped up to the podium, his presence commanding immediate silence. He spoke about courage, sacrifice, resilience. The standard words, but spoken by someone who'd lived them. As he talked, I noticed my family shifting. Not with pride. With impatience. My father checked his watch. Kyle stifled a yawn. Hannah rolled her eyes. Something tightened in my chest. When my name was called, I stepped forward, heels striking the floor in perfect rhythm. Applause filled the hall. Warm. Respectful. Earned. I kept my eyes forward, my expression steady, but inside I was a mess of memories. Dusty streets. Radio chatter. The sudden flash of light. The sound that still visited me in my sleep. As I approached the general, I heard my father's voice cut through the room. She got lucky, not brave. It wasn't loud. It didn't need to be. The words landed like a punch to the ribs. For a split second, time froze. A few heads turned. An officer near me stiffened. The general paused. Not just a polite pause. A full stop. His eyes shifted toward the third row, then back to me. There was something in his expression I couldn't read at the time. Recognition. Confirmation. Maybe even anger. The ceremony continued, but the air had changed. When the general pinned the purple heart onto my uniform, the weight of it felt heavier than I expected. Not because of the medal itself, but because of what it now represented. Survival in spite of something. Not just the enemy. He looked at me and said, "Congratulations, Sergeant Reynolds." Then he turned to face the audience again. That wasn't part of the script. "Ladies and gentlemen," he said, his voice calm but edged with something sharper, "today we honor survival against overwhelming odds." My stomach dropped. He reached into his jacket and pulled out a thin manila folder. "The ambush that wounded Sergeant Reynolds," he continued, "was not random." The room went silent. Not respectful silence. Shocked silence. Our intelligence was compromised. Enemy forces knew patrol routes, timing, and unit movements. That information came from a source no one initially suspected. I felt my pulse in my ears. The general's gaze locked onto the third row. The leak came from her family. Gasps rippled through the hall. My mother's face drained of color. My brother sat frozen. My father half rose from his seat, mouth opening in protest. "That's not possible," he said. "We'd never." Phone records. Emails. Financial transfers, the general said, his voice cutting through the denial. "Payments received in exchange for operational details about your daughter's deployment." My knees almost buckled. Suddenly everything made sense. The sudden money. The new truck. The paid-off debts. The vacations they took while I was bleeding in Afghanistan. I whispered the words before I could stop myself. "They knew we were coming." The general nodded once. "They knew because your family told them." I stood there in full dress uniform, a purple heart on my chest, realizing that the people I'd spent years protecting, supporting, and defending had been the reason my friends never made it home. And that was only the beginning. The ceremony ended, but nothing went back to normal. People stood in clusters, whispering. Some stared at my family like they were radioactive. Others looked at me with a kind of stunned pity that made my skin crawl. I didn't move. I stayed exactly where I was, heels together, spine straight, purple heart heavy on my chest. Soldiers are trained not to fall apart in public. Even when the ground disappears beneath you, you stand. My father wouldn't look at me. My mother cried silently into her hands. My brother kept repeating, "We didn't know," like a prayer he hoped would absolve him. The general didn't raise his voice again. He didn't need to. He simply said the words that shattered what was left of my old life. "This matter is under active investigation. Sergeant Reynolds is not under suspicion. Her family is. That distinction mattered, but not enough to stop the damage. The days that followed blurred into interviews, security reviews, and rooms with no windows. Military investigators don't yell. They don't accuse. They let evidence do the talking. Phone records. Email chains. Bank statements. Dates lined up with deployments. Payments followed information like clockwork. 10,000 here. 15 there. Always from the same shell company. Always shortly after my family shared details about my unit. Where we were based. When we moved. What routes we preferred. What time we rolled out. Details I'd shared casually on phone calls, thinking I was talking to people who loved me. Every conversation replayed in my head. Every time my mom asked, "Are you safe where you are?" Every time my dad asked oddly specific questions about patrol schedules. Every joke my brother made about how predictable the army was. None of it had felt dangerous at the time. It felt like home. The investigators showed me the timeline of the ambush. Enemy forces had known exactly where to place the IED. Exactly which vehicle I'd be riding in. Exactly how long it would take us to reach the choke point. That kind of precision doesn't come from luck. It comes from inside information. 3 soldiers died that day. Jackson. Morales. Finch. Names I still carry with me. Faces I still see when I close my eyes. They had families too. Families who trusted that the people behind the scenes weren't selling pieces of their children's lives for cash. My family said they thought it was harmless. They said they believed the people paying them were researchers. Journalists. Analysts studying military families. They said the money helped them survive. Helped them pay bills. Helped them breathe. I listened to all of it in a small interview room, hands folded, jaw tight, heart breaking in ways no enemy fire had ever managed. "What did you think they were doing with the information?" I asked my mother once, when the investigators stepped out. "Did you think they were writing a book?" She couldn't answer me. My father's explanation was simpler. "The money was good," he said. "Steady. More than construction. They said it was legal. Greed doesn't always look like evil. Sometimes it looks like justification." The military cleared me after exhaustive review. No fault. No negligence. But clearance doesn't erase suspicion. I felt it in the sideways glances. The unspoken question. If your own family could be compromised, what else might follow you into the field? I understood the doubt. Trust is fragile in uniform. Once cracked, it never fully returns. At night, the memories came harder. Not just the ambush. The laughter in our vehicle before it happened. Finch talking about proposing. Morales complaining about the dust. Jackson arguing about music. All of it gone. And now I knew why. The first call came 2 weeks later. It was my sister. She was crying. Rent was due. Her job wasn't enough. She needed help. The old script. The familiar tone that assumed I would step in like I always had. I listened without interrupting, something inside me hardening with every word. "I can't help you," I said when she finished. There was silence. Then anger. "What do you mean you can't? You always help. That's what family does. Family doesn't sell information that gets soldiers killed." The words felt unreal coming out of my mouth, but once they did, they couldn't be pulled back. She called me cruel. Cold. Brainwashed by the army. She said I was punishing everyone over a misunderstanding. One mistake. One mistake that cost lives. I hung up. My brother showed up at my apartment a few days later, carrying beer and a smile like nothing had changed. He talked about moving on. About forgiveness. About how families stick together. When I asked him if he understood what he'd done, he said, "Soldiers die in wars. That's not on us." That was the moment something broke cleanly. I told him to leave. When he didn't, I made him. My father waited longer. When he finally called, his voice was heavy with accusation disguised as concern. He said my mother cried every day. That I was tearing the family apart. That I'd survived, so why couldn't I just let it go? "You're fine," he said. "But if you keep this up, you're going to end up alone." I thought about the people I'd served with. The ones who covered my blind spots. Who dragged me out of wreckage. Who trusted me with their lives. Alone wasn't the threat he thought it was. The investigation ended with arrests. Deals. Sentences lighter than they deserved because cooperation was more valuable than punishment. Justice, they called it. Accountability. None of it brought anyone back. I cut off contact completely after that. No money. No calls. No explanations. Boundaries aren't loud. They're quiet and firm and final. Months passed. Then years. I stayed in. I was promoted. I learned how to talk about what happened without my voice shaking. My story became training material. A warning. Proof that threats don't always come from the other side of the wire. I told younger soldiers to be careful what they shared. To trust their instincts. To document everything. Some listened. One of them uncovered another breach before it turned deadly. But even as my career moved forward, something unfinished lingered behind me. A question I couldn't answer. Was blood really thicker than betrayal? Or was that just something people said to excuse the unforgivable? 5 years later, I'd almost convinced myself the answer didn't matter anymore. Then there was a knock on my door. And standing there was someone I never expected to see again. The knock came on a quiet Tuesday evening. No warning. No text. Just 3 soft taps on my apartment door, deliberate and nervous. I wasn't expecting anyone. Unexpected visitors had learned to make me cautious. When I looked through the peephole, my breath caught. She looked like my sister. Dark hair. Familiar eyes. My father's stubborn jawline. But older. Taller. Not a child anymore. "My name is Emma," she said when I opened the door partway. "I'm your niece. And I know I'm not supposed to be here." She was 16. She stood alone, backpack slung over one shoulder, hands clenched like she was bracing for impact. No one behind her. No ambush. No manipulation disguised as reconciliation. Just a teenager who'd made a decision on her own. "I need to talk to you," she said. "My mom doesn't know I came." The smart thing would have been to close the door. To protect the boundaries I'd fought so hard to build. But something in her eyes stopped me. It wasn't entitlement. It wasn't guilt. It was the same look I'd had at her age. The look of someone who knows the story they've been told doesn't add up. "You have 10 minutes, I said, stepping aside. She walked in slowly, taking in the quiet, the neatness, the absence of family photos. Her eyes landed on the purple heart on my desk, framed simply, no spotlight. She swallowed. "That's real," she said. "Isn't it?" I nodded. They say you overreacted, Emma said, sitting on the edge of my couch. That you destroyed the family over a misunderstanding. That you chose the army over blood. But I started asking questions. She pulled out her phone and showed me pictures. Bank statements. Transfers. A name I recognized instantly. The same shell company the investigators had tracked years ago. I Googled it, she said. It was a front for foreign intelligence. It shut down after your ceremony. The dates match your deployment. The money stopped when you cut everyone off. She looked up at me, eyes glassy but steady. They sold information about you, she said. Didn't they? I didn't answer right away. Some truths deserve space before they land. Yes, I said finally. They did. She didn't cry. She didn't shout. She just sat there, absorbing it. Then she asked the question that mattered most. Is that why you left? Not because you didn't love us. But because you had to protect yourself. I nodded again. Emma pressed her lips together. I needed to hear it from you. Not from people who benefit from pretending it wasn't real. She stood, pacing once, then stopped in front of my desk, staring at the metal. My whole life, she said quietly, was paid for with that money. My clothes. My school. Everything. And I don't want that to be who I am. Her voice cracked then. Just a little. I got into college, she continued. And I'm thinking about enlisting after. Not to make up for what they did. But because I want to be better than it. For the first time in years, something warm cut through the bitterness I'd learned to live with. This wasn't forgiveness. This was proof that the cycle could end. You don't owe anyone your service, I said. But you owe yourself honesty. And you're doing that. She nodded, wiping her face quickly. Can I write to you sometimes? I'm not asking for money. Or favors. Just guidance. I thought about the girl she used to be. The leverage. The weapon. The reminder I was supposed to feel guilty about. And then I looked at who she was becoming. Yes, I said. You can write. When she left, I sat alone with the quiet. With the metal. With the weight of everything that had brought me here. For years, I thought surviving meant enduring. The ambush. The betrayal. The isolation. But I learned something harder. Survival also means choosing where your loyalty ends. I didn't lose my family. I stopped funding my own destruction. I didn't abandon them. I drew a line where my life began to matter more than their excuses. Today, I still serve. I train younger soldiers. I teach them that operational security isn't paranoia. That boundaries aren't cruelty. That sometimes the most dangerous question isn't asked by the enemy, but by someone who says they love you. The purple heart on my desk doesn't remind me of what I lost. It reminds me of what I refuse to lose again. My name is Jessica Reynolds. I survived an ambush in Kandahar. And I survived learning that blood doesn't guarantee loyalty. If this story resonated with you, let me know in the comments. Have you ever been dismissed, betrayed, or minimized by the people who should have stood beside you? Where did you draw your line? If you've served, or loved someone who has, how do you protect your boundaries with family? And if you're watching from somewhere tonight, tell me where you're tuning in from. If stories about reclaiming your worth matter to you, hit like, subscribe, and turn on notifications. Because sometimes the bravest thing you can do isn't staying loyal to people who hurt you. It's choosing yourself.